Good afternoon. This is Bill Brayton, and we're talking to the West Coast today. I'm an ATRA senior research technician, and we're going to be talking about the Honda 6-speed, how to disassemble and assemble a unit quickly and efficiently. And already, yeah, I have a question from Pete Townsend, and the answer is I have no idea, Pete. Okay, so moving right along. First thing I want to talk to you guys about is your connections. If you're working on Wi-Fi or some other wireless configuration, it's not a good idea because you may run into disconnect problems or interruptions. So you want to be sure that you're hardwired when you go through the webinar series this year. Okay, everybody should have handouts by now. If you don't, send an email to webinars@atra.com or give us a shout out in your chat box there, and we'll get that taken care of. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and type in your question. I see Aaron needs a handout. We'll get that taken care of straight away, Aaron. And finally, so if you have any questions, type it in the chat box. We'll get that question answered as soon as possible. Also, at the end of the presentation, you'll be emailed a survey. You'll be emailed a survey, and if you would take a moment to fill that out, we'd certainly appreciate it. Okay. Today's presentation is brought to you by Steel Aftermarket Products, your source for engineered solutions. Now, a word from our sponsor. Steel Aftermarket Products, engineered and manufactured Toledo kit with a rebuilder in mind, including everything you need to get the job done right. Toledo Transkit is the #1 choice of installer because of all the expensive that goes into each component.
Bill, we need the audio on the video.
Preventing PPC damage by eliminating the shredding you get from original equipment, plus all of the extra essentials that are included, like spring and screen filters that should be changed at overhaul. Toledo Transkit even includes loose valve body gaskets that fit all 19 bonded separator plates. At Steel Aftermarket Products, we don't just make kits, we make kits better. Ask for Toledo Transkit by name.
Alrighty then. Also today, I'd like to give a shout out to our co-sponsors at Whatever It Takes Transmission Parts and my favorite publication, Gears Magazine, for the transmission rebuilding industry. Okay, looks like we got one more bit of business here, one or two more bits here. If there's any questions or comments on today's presentations, please contact Lance Wiggins at ATRA. His email address is lwiggins@atra.com. Here's our webinar schedule for the year. We have got a full schedule of 20 dates just packed with information for you guys. So we really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to get trained and get up to date on the latest tech. All right, it's never too early to plan ahead for Expo. The Expo this year is October 29th through November 1st. We're back again at the Rio Hotel and Casino in Vegas. This year we've got a huge showroom floor, jam-packed sessions of management and tech, so much so that we had to increase the size and the length of time. So that's going to be a very cool event. And this year, starting with your local seminars that we travel around the country with on the West Coast, we'll be in LA, we'll be up by San Francisco area, and up in Washington and Oregon. So at those seminars, we're going to be giving away a free Expo registration for all 4 days, and hotel room at the Rio on the house. So it's a one lucky winner at those seminars. So be sure and you make that local seminar in your area. We'll be giving away those goodies. Okay, let's get after it. The 6-speed, the Honda 6-speed is in the Odyssey and the Accord, 2011 and 2013 Accord, 2011 Odyssey and 2013 Accord. So also in all these ATRA applications, you know, in the ZDX and the MDX, this 6-speed's been around since 2010. So chances are good that if you haven't seen one of these yet, you will be very shortly. All right, let's get after this unit here. We're going to set it bell housing down on the bench and remove the 4 end covers. On the left-hand shaft, we've got a 34 millimeter 12-point left-handed thread nut. On the right side, on the input shaft, we've got a 6.42 millimeter right-handed thread. The washers underneath these nuts are press fit onto the shafts, so you'll have to use a couple of screwdrivers to pry them up off the shafts. They also have an X. They also have an X stamped into them, and the X always faces up. All right. Now we're going to take all the accessories off the side of the case, the MLP, the filler tube, speed sensor, trans temp, cooler lines. All that stuff's going to be set aside. And if you don't have a book to show you the location of all these items, I would highly recommend that you use your handy-dandy cell phone camera and take a picture of this so you can get all of these accessories back in their right position. Okay, let's take the solenoid body off, and we'll check it out here. It's got 4 PWM solenoids on the right-hand side of the solenoid body. These are clutch pressure control solenoids. This unit's a bit different than its predecessors. Honda has 1 or 2 models that do not have CPC valves, and this is another unit that does not have CPC valves. This has CPC solenoids only. These CPC solenoids, they run the pressure, they control the pressure of the offgoing and the oncoming clutch, and once the shift transition's been made, the pressure, the line pressure runs through the solenoid, much like a 604 has done ever since it was born. So that's the same way this unit works. The on-off solenoids on the left operate switch valves, which allow the CPC solenoids to control more than one clutch. This Honda is very different from all the rest in that it has a line pressure solenoid. Now, this isn't a line pressure solenoid like we think that we become to know, where it starts off at a lower pressure and the solenoid controls boost and it raises the pressure up to maximum. This is, they call it a line pressure solenoid, but it really is a line pressure reduction solenoid. Well, let's take a look at how that works. In this schematic, we've got the solenoid is in its off position right here. It's a normally closed solenoid. All right, now we're going to turn it on. The computer commands the solenoid on. Now we've got pressure going to the left side of the pressure regulator valve. Moving from right to left is higher pressure. Moving from left to right is lower pressure. So what happens here is that this extra pressure pushes the valve, opening up this passage right here. So it takes this pressure, this line pressure here, and raises the pressure in the lubrication circuit right here. Well, to keep that pressure at a manageable point, the lubrication regulator valve takes care of that by dumping the pressure back into the sump. Well, not only does it reduce the line pressure, the solenoid pressure comes through this valve over here and to the lubrication regulator valve. pushing it to the left. That further opens this passage to dump the pressure, controlling the overall line pressure in the transmission. Normal pressure in this unit is much higher than the older units that run 120 to 135 psi. This unit runs between 150 and 170 normally. Okay, when the solenoid comes on, as we see on this screen, that reduces the pressure to between 50 and 75 pounds. The computer will do this when they were in a cruise mode, maybe we're at a stop, when it determines there's a low demand for max pressure. Here's the back side of the solenoid body. We've got 11 tubes right here. The end that has the wider gap right here fits into the body. And all 11 solenoids have the filter right here. And it's a good idea to take a sharp knife and pry this thimble filter out of these tubes, because we're going to hold them up to the light and they've got to be completely free of debris. We see in this unit's no different than the past units, where if you get clogged up screens right here, the unit will not work correctly. Okay, we've got the unit on its side right here. We're going to remove the case to bell housing bolts. We've got 16 12 millimeter and 14 millimeter bolts. Flip it over up. Now we got the bell housing down again. We're going to manipulate the snap ring through this cover. This is engaged into the bearing on the end of the shaft. We're going to pry the case off of the bell housing. Now when you do this, you got to make sure that you don't damage the gasket sealing area here and here. It's, once you get a screwdriver in between these halves, you're going to have to put a little bit of force on it. So just be very careful that you don't damage the gasket sealing area. Another thing to watch out for when you pull this case half off, when you lift the case half up and off the gear train here, this spacer may stick to the inside of the case. And what happens is the rebuilder will pick up the case, set the case aside, and continue with tearing the unit down. And if he's not aware of that washer, he won't even know it's there because it sticks to the case. Then when he goes back together, if you didn't see this, this goes into the cleaning machine. The case goes into the cleaning machine, and then the washer goes down into the bottom of the cleaning machine, never to be seen from again. Or if it knocks off and gets kicked under a bench, well, we know what happens to things that get kicked under the bench. All right, so if this washer's gone, this is the transfer shaft. The shaft will bounce up and down and beat itself to death. Be sure to pay very careful attention to that spacer. Okay, let's remove and discard the filter. Just a couple of bolts right here. The one thing to note is it's best to use a 1/4 inch drive socket here, because a 3/8 drive socket won't get in between the selector lever and the filter. We've got one feed pipe here that goes into the case, that's all. It's nice of Honda to not have a bunch of odd-sized tubes in this unit. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to get the lube dam out, we're going to remove the reverse gear, the selector lever, and the slider. So here we've got the reverse gear, the sleeve, and the roller bearing coming off the shaft. And here we've got the selector gear and the fork. The ID ring on the selector gear goes down. If you forget that that's the way it goes, you can look at the teeth on either side of the selector gear. On the top side here, the teeth are slanted on one side, and the teeth on the bottom of the gear right here are pointed teeth. The reverse gear has slanted teeth, and the gear down on the shaft has pointed teeth. That's how you can tell which way that goes in. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, we could take this big piece of plastic here, unbolt it. There's 3 screws that are holding it in, and this lube tube right here. This lube tube feeds the bearing out here on the end of the shaft. So that's just a single piece of plastic, fits in there really nice. Okay, now we're going to remove the bearings. The counter shaft bolt that we're looking at right here is the 12-millimeter bolt. This is the left-handed thread bolt. The secondary shaft over here is the smaller bolt. That's right-handed threads. That's an 8-millimeter bolt. On the secondary shaft right here, we've got this short arm puller. That's pretty common, not a big deal. This bearing comes off and out of there quite simply. But here's the right way and the wrong way to do the counter shaft bearing. Now on the left, we've got how not to do it. I know you want to do it, but don't do it. Because what happens is the jaws, when the jaw is right up underneath the gear tooth right here, when you use the puller in this arrangement, it's going to crack or chip these teeth every time. And it's too sensitive of a transmission to, think that a chipped gear is okay to reuse. How many hours would it take to install this transmission? Oh, it's got a noise in a certain gear that wasn't there before, because you didn't want to tell the boss you chipped the tooth on a gear, only to have the unit have to be pulled back out. It chipped the gear. I wonder how that happened. So the unit on the picture on the right shows the correct way to use it. The bearing spreader will fit right in this ring groove right here, and we hook up the rest of the puller and get that double row ball bearing off of there. It's a pretty stout bearing. Well, when that happens, that leaves the lower race against the gear on the counter shaft. So then we just take our our small arm puller, and pull the lower part of the bearing, and now we continue to take the gear train out. Now, normally in a Honda factory book, it would tell you to take all 4 shafts out at the same time. Well, I don't know who's big enough to do that all at one time, and it would probably take 4 guys to steady it all up in there to do that anyway. Well, that's ridiculous, and that's why we came up with this step-by-step procedure to get the gear train apart. Okay, here we're going to take the second gear off the counter shaft. That leaves us room to pull the complete input shaft assembly up and out on its own, and we can set it aside for later. That leaves us room. The input shaft is right here. Now we can remove the third shaft, and then we're going to take the 2.5 drum off of the secondary shaft. At this point, the secondary shaft's still going to stay in the case, but we're going to take the drum off so we can facilitate removing both of these shafts at the same time. Here the drum is. Here's the shaft without the drum on it. And now this is a good time to remove those feed pipes right here, because you can see right here that we're going to take the counter shaft off next, but the tubes have to be out of the way in order to do that. So here's the backside with the tubes removed, and out comes the idler gear. Now, to make it easier to remove these shafts, we're going to remove the sleeve and the spacer from the counter shaft. That allows us to grab these 2 shafts and lift them up out of the assembly. Now that concludes removing all the shafts out, and all that's left of the gear train is the differential and the transfer shaft. This isn't an all-wheel drive vehicle, obviously. Okay, a couple things on the inside to go through. The third shaft with the 4th clutch on it has a sleeve. You have to remove this snap ring right here, the snap ring, and pull this sleeve out. You didn't know that sleeve was in there. That could be problematic on a high mileage unit. We could run into a case if we don't change this on a high mileage unit. These O-rings could become hard and brittle, and if they may not seal correctly. And if don't change those and you have those hard seals, what you're going to run into is some shifting issues. Anytime the fourth clutch is coming on, it'll come on slowly. So we may have a 3-4 flare, 3-4 slip, 5-4 flare, 5-4 slip, or we may even run into a delayed engagement into reverse because the fourth clutch is applied in reverse on this unit. Okay, this bearing down in the case, there's a sleeve underneath here, so we need to pull this bearing apart. We've seen this setup in the previous 5-speeds, and it's no different on this unit. So it's very, very critical that we remove this bearing from the case to get to the sleeve. Well, we're going to use this puller and a 10mm socket. This puller is a Toyota factory tool for removing oil seals. We've got the OTC part number for you here. If you just Google that part number, that'll come up on the internet straight away. So we put the 10mm socket over a feed pipe. There's a feed pipe down in here, and then we're going to spread the jaws out and get this bearing up and out of there. It's a super tight fit, so what a good idea is to take the case completely down to the bare bell housing. When you put it in the machine, have pressure on this puller so that when it could either start at the bearing coming out when it gets nice and heated up, or when it comes out, you can get down on that puller and the bearing will come up easier out of that case. See, the thing with this is if you don't have this type of puller, you're going to need to use a slide hammer arrangement, some sort of slide hammer arrangement to get up in that bearing and up and out of there, which is really difficult because you're going to have a couple of guys stand on this case. It's so tight that you'll be slamming this bell housing around trying to get that bearing out. One question the guys ask me is will the case support the pressure? In other words, I'm not going to drive this 10mm socket through the other side of the case, am I? No, you're not, because the bell housing area where it mounts to the back of the engine is right there. So you've got quite a large mass of aluminum there, and it takes the pressure of pulling the bearing out. Here's what we see when the bearing's up and out of here. Sleeve as in some of the previous 5-speeds. Here's a look at the tube down in the case. There's also a bearing underneath there. I've yet to see a problem with this bearing or this pipe. It is non-replaceable. If this pipe is damaged in any way, you're going to replace the case. Now, this was a little tough. This one was tough when I had to pull it out of this case, so I damaged it because it was difficult to get something in between the aluminum and this sleeve right here. So stuff happens, and I ended up damaging this sleeve. I had to get a new one. Well, here's the part number for the new one, and last time I checked online, it was about $22. So if you damage it, just replace it. It's really, they're quite readily available, and they're easy to get to. So if you need to, you can go to this website that I put up here for you. I'll give you guys a second to write this down, www.hondapartsunlimited.com. This is a very cool Honda Acura website. It has Honda and Acura parts there, and you can put in the VIN of your car and or the year, make, and model application, and that website will pull up exactly the right parts for your application. And I was turned on to it by a friend of mine at a production Honda shop, so I'm just letting you guys know about it. So write this down, and the next time you need Honda parts, I suggest that you go take a look at it. Even if you want to order it from your local dealer, you can look it up, whatever it is that you need, and then you've got the part number, and take it to your dealer. This website has yet to do me wrong as far as the correct part number. So HondaPartsUnlimited.com. Okay, the other thing that we want to point out here, This has a tab, an alignment tab. It goes into a slot down here. Very important. It won't go all the way down, but this is a pretty tight fit, and I wouldn't want to damage a brand new sleeve, so it's a good idea to take a punch or a scribe and make a mark in the X of the middle of this tab to help you align it down into this slot. Once you push it down in there, it's good to go. Okay, got the sleeve out. This is another interesting thing about the internal part of this unit is that it has a standalone sleeve where the input shaft sealing rings ride. Other Hondas, all Hondas, have always had that sleeve as part of the regulator body down here. Now if this area is damaged, you could simply replace this piece on its own. You don't have to replace the whole regulator body. It's a pretty cool feature. Now, I talked about CPC solenoids a little bit earlier. Remember, I said they're clutch pressure control solenoids, and they control the pressure of the clutch coming off and the pressure of the clutch coming on, so the computer controls the pressure that way to make a smooth shift. The CPC valves do not control line pressure. Some guys think that those solenoids are for line pressure. That's not what controls line pressure. The arm on the stator tube right here works on the pressure regulator valve. When the torque demand is high, the arm twists and pushes the regulator into the valve body, raising lower pressure. And when the torque is off of it, that comes to a resting position and it comes back out this way. That's what controls line pressure on every Honda that I've ever seen. Okay, so that's what controls line pressure in a Honda. Okay, we got a very stout park pawl assembly here we're going to pull out. This does not need to be disassembled during the teardown process, just a couple of 12-millimeter bolts. This indexes into the case here and here. That'll come out, set aside. We're going to take the manual lever out of the case, so we're going to take the detent arm and pivot post out. This is like some of the previous units that we've had. This wraps around, this spring wraps around the shaft right here. And we're going to twist this counterclockwise to disengage the arm from the manual valve. This manual valve, unlike previous Hondas, we always had to take this jam bolt out here and slide this mechanism off of the manual valve. This is no longer necessary to disassemble. We just disengage it from the arm, pull it out of the case, and set it aside. Okay. Here we got the manual lever body off for you guys to just a little bit of an identification. This is the fourth clutch accumulator right here. The fourth clutch accumulator, and we're going to remove the plate to illustrate where the two check balls are in this unit. These check balls are orificing check balls, so if you forget them or you think you put them in and it fell down over in this pocket right here, you'll get some abrupt engagements. That would be the result of leaving these balls out. So if you get harsh engagements, whoops, probably forgot those check balls. Okay. Here's the regulator body off. This is the, I got those backwards. I made a mistake. This is the fourth accumulator. The accumulator here is the first accumulator. First accumulator, fourth accumulator. Fourth accumulator, first accumulator. There we go. The selector piston right here, and of course the PR valve lineup. Now, the rest of the valve body, I don't have it apart for you guys, but the rest of the valve body is pretty straightforward Honda stuff where we've got Teflon coated valves and steel valves working in there. My biggest thing with these valve bodies is, and I know you guys get tired of hearing me say it, but every valve out of every bore, out of every Honda, every time. Because the life you save may be your own. You know, it doesn't take long to pull the end covers out, pull the valves out, down to an aluminum casting, blow it all off, make sure the valves drop into their bore on their own, tink, and they hit the bottom of the bore. That's how it's supposed to go. On Hondas, you guys got to realize that your pick or your scribe and your pocket screwdriver are not rebuilding tools. They are not valve body rebuilding tools. Just because I picked this valve right here and I picked this valve right here doesn't mean I have to leave it alone. See, the train of thought generally is, well, you know, I don't have time to do it. I can dip it, I can blow it off, I can flick the valves, it's good to go. Well, why is it that you didn't have time to do it this time, but when you drive it around the block or the boss road tests the car and it comes back with a P0740 because the torque converter clutch doesn't work, well, then you change solenoids and it still does it, because once that happens, you have to pull the unit back out and go through the valve body correctly. Now, you never have time to do it right the first time, but it always seems that the second time around, there's plenty of time to do it right. Funny how that works. So my advice to everyone out there is to take the time, pull the plugs out, because you're going to inspect them for wear, replace them as necessary. You're going to make sure the valves drop into their bores on their own weight. You're going to look at the condition of the Teflon valves and bores. If they're scratched up, you're going to replace the valve body or the valves themselves. As of this writing, I do not know if the aftermarket has O-ring end plugs for this model just yet. I'm sure if they don't, they'll be working on it presently to get that product made. So if they're not available, you can always use the cooler line method to swedge up the end plugs here to keep them steady in the bore. Okay. Here we have a link for you guys. It's in your handout material. This is a video demonstration of the unit that I just got done talking about. And you can go to that website and check out the teardown I did at Expo last year, and check it out. So at this time, are there any questions whatsoever? And while you're thinking about those questions, and go ahead and type them in. I would like to thank our co-sponsors, Whatever It Takes Transmission Parts, and my favorite publication, Gears Magazine, for the rebuilding industry. And also today's presentation, main sponsor, Steel Aftermarket, your source for engineered solutions. So if there are no other questions out there, I would like to thank you all for attending, and a shout out to Tranny Bob and Henry Blair. Good to see you guys out here. You guys have a linkage assembly. Aaron Speck wants to back up and show an image of the linkage assembly. Yes, I'd certainly be happy to do that. There we go. Here's the linkage assembly engaged into the manual valve. This is the detent arm and pivot assembly. And this is what the manual linkage, yeah, that will, here, you want to see a pivot on the case. This is where it would rotate. I don't actually, let's see if we've got it. Yeah, it's back in behind. The pivot arm right here is back in behind. You can just see the bottom of it engaging into the rooster cone right here. That's where it pivots on the case. It's kind of behind this assembly right here. So it actually, this detent engages right here. It fits into the case behind my hand right there, as a matter of fact. You could see the hole right here where it engages. This sits in here, and it pivots in this bearing actually right here. All right, very cool. Are there any other questions today? Next year, Paul says, next year make the sound system work better and the live demo. We are working on the live demo, Paul. We're just working out how to live stream here on our webinars. So that'll be coming up. Very soon. Perhaps more than likely before the end of the year is done, we'll be able to stream within this program. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Justin TV, yeah, we'll take a look at that, Aaron. Thank you very much. Let's see. Anything else, you guys? All right, well, thank you very much for attending. My name's Bill Brayton, and have a great